to 8 p.m. All right, that's what I wanted to cover, and so we're going to get into the message today, and we're in John chapter 9. So if you have your Bible with you, you can open up, you can follow along. I'm going to put as much as I can up on the screen. I'm going to read through it. So we've been going section by section through this chapter, and I want to recap all of it for you. So if you forgot what we talked about last week, or if you were not around last week, you can just know what we've been talking about. So this is John chapter 9. I'm going to start with verse 1. So as Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that caused him to be born blind?" And Jesus said, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him." And then Jesus said, "As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. And while I am in the world," Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. And he told him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." And that's a word that means sent. So the man went, and he washed, and he came home seeing. So through the saliva, the mud, the spit, the mud, the washing, he's suddenly able to see. He hasn't been able to see his entire life. He went home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was, but others said, "No, he only looks like the guy." But he himself insisted, "I am the man. I'm the same guy." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. So they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been born blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received sight. Now they're concerned about, did Jesus do work on the Sabbath when he wasn't supposed to work? That's why they're questioning about, what did he do? Tell us exactly, what he did. How much work did he do on the Sabbath? So he said, "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he doesn't keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He's a prophet." In other words, he's from God. He's sent from God. They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" They answered, "We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He'll speak for himself." His parents said this, John adds, his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That's why his parents said, "He's of age, ask him." Now, a second time they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man," talking about Jesus, "we know this man is a sinner." And the man who was born blind replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, and now I see." Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I've told you already. You didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" Love it. Then they hurled insults at him and said, You're this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." And the man answered, "This is remarkable." I love the sarcasm here. "You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. All right, that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to start with some words. Maybe these are familiar to you. You are not good enough. Have you heard that? Have you heard that? Is that a message that someone spoke to you? Or maybe they didn't speak those actual words, but they communicated it in the way they treated you, or ignored you, or neglected you, or didn't think you could do anything. You're not good enough. Have you heard that? And maybe it's not as much hearing it from others, but maybe where you hear that the most, you're not good enough, is your internal dialogue. Maybe you hear that the most from yourself. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good looking enough. I'm not successful enough. I'm not skilled enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not good enough. Have you heard that message? Have you believed that message? This was the message that the man who was born blind had heard over and over again as he would sit by the side of the road begging for charity, for money, and people would pass him by, and the message he received was, "You're not good enough." We heard at the beginning, a lot of people thought that he was born blind because it was his fault. He deserved it for some reason. It was something he had done or something in his character. He deserved it. And so people gave him that message, "You're not good enough. You deserve this. This is your own fault." And then people would pass him by. He's not good enough to engage in a conversation, to get my attention, to be worthy of my time. He's not good enough to fit in. He's not good enough to hold down a job. People would pass by and ignore him. This would have been the message that he heard over and over again. You're not good enough. Maybe you've heard that message too. I know for me growing up, I had this belief. I always thought, I was convinced, I don't have what it takes to be a leader. That's what I believed. Growing up, I don't have what it takes. And a big reason, and this is where a lot of the I'm not good enough comes from, it comes from comparison. Because I would look at my older brother. My older brother was the kind of guy, he would walk into a room and within seconds, he would have had made 5 or 6 friends, just like that. When my older brother, when he talked, people just kind of listened to him. When he got together in a group, everyone looked to him. He was the one who kind of took charge and led. And, he was even like a couple inches taller than everyone else in our family, which doesn't take much, but again, we all looked up to him, right? And then when he said something to do something, people just responded. They did it, and he had a lot of practice on me as his little brother. And so I just believed growing up, I don't have what it takes to be a leader. I don't have those qualities. I couldn't be a leader. I'm not good enough. That's what I believed. And maybe you believe things like that, whatever it is in your life, you believe I'm not good enough. But I hope that you've had the blessing of someone who comes along and challenges that in your life. Challenges that idea, that lie, that message, I'm not good enough. So I had someone like that in my life. It was, I was just out of high school. And, here at Epic Church, we have our Bible quizzing program. I was in Bible quizzing as a kid. I was just out of high school, and there was a team that was going to a national tournament. It was a big deal. And a pastor who was the leader of the Bible quizzing organization, who I really looked up to, he came to me and he said, John, I want you to coach this team at this tournament. And I couldn't believe it, because I knew there were lots of other people who I thought were better qualified than I was to do that. People who are older, who had more experience, who knew what they were doing, who would be better at it. But they didn't ask those people. He came to me and said, John, I think you would be great at this. I really want you to consider coaching this team. I think you would do great at it. I thought it was crazy. But I was excited for the opportunity. I was honored to be asked, and so I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I went and I coached this team, and I didn't think I was qualified. I didn't think I'd do a very good job, but I went anyway, and guess what happened? God showed up. And he worked through me to lead this team and have an impact on their lives. And it was incredible to me seeing it from that perspective of someone who went in thinking, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, I'm not qualified, but then to see God show up and work through me, and even working through my own weaknesses to show up. So I hope you've had someone who's challenged your thinking, and through that experience, it began to challenge my own thinking. Whenever I started to think, well, I can't do that, I'm not good enough, I started to think, well, wait a second, maybe God can show up. And here's what God does over and over again. He shows up on his terms, not on our terms. A lot of times we want to set the terms for what God can do and what God can't do. Like, God, you could never work through me to do this or that. And so we like to set the terms. Like, God, you could definitely use that person. They're so talented. They're so gifted. You could never use me. We like to set the terms. But when God shows up, he shows up on his terms, not on our terms. And I love what happens in the story is at the beginning of the day, who would have guessed that the man born blind who sat at the side of the road begging, that he would end up later in the day basically giving a theology lecture to the Pharisees and schooling them on what was supposed to be their area of expertise. But that's exactly what happened. God showed up on his terms. And so I want to challenge you, if you're asking the question, am I good enough? That's a common question we ask, am I good enough? That is not the right question to ask. When God calls you to do something, when God is leading you to do something, the right question to ask is not, am I good enough? The right question to ask is, can God show up? Do I believe that God is able to show up even in my weakness, even in my shortcomings, even where I feel like I'm not qualified? Is God able to show up for his glory? Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had said no. If I'd been asked to lead and I said, no, I'm not a leader, I'm not going to do it. I wonder even if I'd be here today as a pastor, if I had said no and hadn't seen how God can show up even when we feel inadequate. So I want to ask you, what's your excuse? What's your not enough? What's your excuse what's the reason that you give when you tell God that he can't show up or he shouldn't show up or you don't believe he will show up? What is your excuse? Is it, I'm too young? I'm too young. Who's going to listen to me? I'm too young. I don't have the experience. Is it, I'm too old? I'm past my prime. Someone younger should be doing it instead. Is it, I'm not smart enough? Is it, I have too much of a past? I've got too much baggage. I've been through too much before. Is it, I don't have a good enough story? Who's going to listen to me? Is it, I don't have the gifts? Is it, I don't have the time? Is it, I don't have the training? I don't have the experience? Is it, I'm not holy enough? I'm not a good enough person? How could God work through me? What is your excuse? What is your reason, your terms for saying, God, you can't show up here, you can't do that? You never could do that through me. What's your excuse? What's your not enough? You know, it's interesting, if you read through the Bible, you can find time after time when God uses unexpected people to do his work for his glory. People that never saw it coming, people that everyone else looked at and said that God could never use them. Time after time, God uses unexpected people to do his work for his glory. Have you ever heard of Moses? Moses was the guy the Pharisees were like, we're not disciples of this Jesus guy, we're disciples of Moses. Everyone loved Moses. That was then. But Moses, when God first showed up to him, he was in the wilderness, he was tending sheep, he was 80 years old, and God showed up, and he said, Moses, I want you to go to the most powerful person in the known world. I want you to go to the most powerful person, the Pharaoh, and I want you to tell him what to do. And Moses' reaction is like, I can't do that. In fact, he says to God, he says, I'm slow of tongue. And there's some people who study this who think what Moses might have meant by that is that he had a speech impediment or like a stutter or something like that. Like he couldn't speak well. That was Moses' excuse. I can't speak well. How am I supposed to go up against Pharaoh and carry your message? I'm not even a good speaker. But he went, and God showed up. He went head to head with Pharaoh. God showed up, and God freed his people from slavery for God's glory. There's Gideon. Gideon, one of the judges, you can read about him, Judges chapter 6. God calls him to lead his people against the Midianites. And Gideon says, no, you don't want me. I'm from the weakest family, from the weakest clan, from the weakest tribe. We are the lowest of the low. There's got to be someone better qualified with better credentials than me. There's no way you could use me. But God said, no, I want to use you. And God used and worked through Gideon. God showed up. And through Gideon's leadership, they defeated the Midianites in this incredible way. And God got the glory. Then there's David. Now, David believed that God could show up, but everyone around him didn't think he could. His brothers laughed at him. People thought, this guy's not even a soldier. He's a shepherd boy. He's bringing lunches for people. He's not going to go against a giant and fight him. But what happened? God showed up for his glory. And then the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul had quite the past. He was famous, infamous really, among the church for rounding up Christians, throwing them in prison. And people would have assumed there's no way, no one's going to listen to the teaching of Paul, this guy who used to throw Christians in prison. No one wants to hear from him. He's got too much of a past. But God called him to spread the gospel, to preach the message. He changed his life. And God showed up and worked through Paul and grew the church powerfully through his words. And there's one letter where Paul writes to the church in Corinth. And he talks about this way that God has of using unexpected people to do God's work for God's glory. This is what he said, 1 Corinthians chapter 1. It says, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. So go back before God called you to follow him. Think about your station in life. Think about where you were in the world. Think about how other people saw you and what they thought when they looked at you. Not many of you were wise by human standards. You weren't the most educated. You weren't the smartest. In a room where a question came up, it wasn't like everyone just looked to you and said, what does this person have to say about it? You weren't wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. You weren't people that everyone in the world kind of looked to and say, what do they have to say about it? We want to follow them. You didn't have these influential roles or positions or authority. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. In other words, God chose people who were seen by the world as unintelligent, not wise, not important. He chose you. God chose you for a reason to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things, the people that everyone else looked down on, ignored, rejected. God chose you to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before God. And this is what God does in the story of the man who was born blind. Everyone overlooked him. No one thought much of him. But then Jesus heals him, and now he's standing in front of the Pharisees and schooling them on the ways of God. God uses and chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong, the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God uses unexpected people to do his work for his glory. And God does that today in his church. I mean, there's people in this room who thought, I couldn't take on a leadership role. Like, I can't do that. I don't have the ability to do that. But God called you to do it. You stepped up, and God showed up. There's people who say, I can't. People younger than me, they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to want to spend time with me or learn from me. But then they were obedient to God, and God showed up. And this isn't a thing where it's about, you just believe it and it will happen. You just believe it into existence. It's not about a self-esteem. If you just feel good enough about yourself, it can happen. That's not what it's about. It's about God's power to show up when he calls you to do his will. And the reason I say it's not just about if you just believe enough it will happen, or you just have self-esteem it will happen, because I'm pretty sure the people who tried to build the Tower of Babel, I'm pretty sure their self-esteem was high. Because they thought, we're going to build the biggest tall tower in the world, people are going to be able to see it from miles around, and everyone's going to look at it and say, wow, those people are incredible. They're amazing. They're so talented. They're so determined. But the problem is they wanted to do it not for God's glory, they wanted to do it for their own glory. And when they tried to build that tower, they weren't lacking in self-esteem, and God did show up, but he showed up in the way they weren't expecting. And he confused their language and prevented them from building that tower. Now the Pharisees thought if anyone was from God, that this person would be a lot more like them. If someone was from God, the Pharisees thought they would be a lot more like a Pharisee. They would look a lot more like us. They would think a lot more like us. If this person was from God, if this Jesus was from God, he wouldn't be going around healing on the Sabbath like Jesus was doing. He'd be more like them. He'd be sitting around on the Sabbath telling everyone what they shouldn't do. They thought Jesus, if he was from God, he'd be a lot more like them. They expected that the Messiah could never be from a place like Galilee. And they expected that they could never learn anything from a blind man, a man who was born blind. And they assumed that he must have done something wrong to deserve that. And so with the Pharisees, they didn't suffer from the problem of I'm not good enough. They suffered from the problem of I'm better than. I'm better than. And both these things, the I'm not good enough and the I'm better than, they're not going to keep God from showing up, but they will keep you from seeing God when he does show up. The Pharisees were so stuck on this I'm better than idea that they didn't even recognize when the Son of Man or the Son of God was standing in their midst. They didn't even recognize it. They couldn't even see it. They were blinded to it because they were stuck on this idea, I'm better than. I don't have anything to learn from this Jesus. I don't have anything to learn from this man who was born blind. Because they were stuck on the I'm better than. They were blinded to get what God was doing. They didn't believe that they could learn from anyone who didn't think like them. And so let me tell you, if you believe you can't learn anything from anyone who doesn't agree with you, you're not going to do much learning. The Pharisees, who thought they were better than, ended up getting schooled by the man that they had passed by earlier in the day, blind and begging for money, because God uses unexpected people for his work and for his glory. And so they were so convinced that they couldn't learn anything from this guy that they went right back to that age-old refrain. Like, he must be blind because he did something wrong. And so why should we listen to him? Why should we listen to a sinner like him? Even though we know Jesus already answered this question. He wasn't blind because he had sinned. He was blind because God wanted to show up through him and show his power through him. But the Pharisees go back to that old refrain. And eventually they say, as this guy talks about, listen, this guy gave sight to the blind. He's got to be from God. If he's not from God, why would he go around healing people? How could he even do this if he wasn't from God? But they say, we don't have to listen to you. And so they eventually say, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? We don't have anything to learn from you. We don't have to listen to you. We're better than you. And they threw him out. And they missed the opportunity to hear more about Jesus. They were blind to what God was doing because they were stuck on the I'm better than. So again, both these things, the I'm not good enough, God could never work through me, or the I'm better than, I don't have anything to learn from you, both these things, they're not going to keep God from showing up, but they'll keep you from seeing God when he does show up. So I want to ask you a couple questions. One, do you think you're better than? And you might not say that out loud. You might not want to admit it out loud. But do you work with the assumption that you can't learn from people who are older than you? Or that you can't learn from people who are younger than you? Or that you can't learn from people who have less education than you do, or less of a position than you do? Do you think you can only learn from people who are like you, or better than you, or higher than you in position? If so, I would challenge you on that. You don't want to be blind to what God might be trying to teach you and show you. Or, second question, do you fall for that lie, I'm not good enough? I'm not good enough. Ultimately, the message of I'm not good enough is God can't show up. God can't fill in the gaps. I'm too much of a failure, or I'm too weak, that God can't even overcome it. That's the lie. That's the message. Do you fall for it? I'm not good enough. Now, I believe that the effectiveness of God's church here and throughout the world is severely stunted by that lie, that I'm not good enough lie, that God could never use me, God could never work through me lie. People will never listen to me. I don't have anything to offer. It's basically saying God can't show up, but I believe that God can. And I believe if you trust God and you go out on a limb and say, yes, God, I'll follow you wherever you call me, even if I don't see it, even if I don't think that I can do it, or that I'm good enough, or I have what it takes, God, I believe where you're leading me, I'm going to follow, and I believe, God, that you will show up. And he will show up, and he'll get the glory. What ended up happening with the Pharisees is that it started, they didn't think they could learn anything from the man who was born blind, so they threw him out. The exact same thing happened with the Pharisees and Jesus. They were convinced, we can't possibly learn anything from this guy. He doesn't have anything to teach us. They thought they were better than Jesus. They thought they didn't need to listen to Jesus, and they thought the most convenient way to deal with it would just to be get rid of Jesus. And so in their spiritual blindness, in their attitude of I'm better than, they arrested Jesus in the dead of night and they crucified him. But guess what happened? God showed up. God raised him from the dead. And God showed up in the weakness of Jesus' suffering to show the strength and power of his salvation. And then after that, God showed up in his disciples as they saw Jesus risen from the dead, and they believed in him, and they were moved by the Holy Spirit to follow God's direction. God showed up in Peter, who had denied Jesus and probably thought, I don't deserve a second chance. I've messed it up. But God showed up in Peter and worked through Peter and his ministry. And God showed up in Peter and John. They were ordinary people, fishermen, and they might have thought, they had every reason to believe, who's ever going to listen to us? Who's ever going to hear what we have to say? But God showed up and used them as a mouthpiece for his gospel message. In the same way, God uses his church and shows up even when you feel like you're not good enough. And you can try him on that. You can test him on that. When you are called, answer the call and give room for God to show up so that he can get the glory. Even though sometimes we might feel like we're not enough. We don't have enough. I'm not skilled enough. I'm not educated enough. Here's the thing. Jesus is enough. He's enough for this life, and he's enough for the life to come. And his blood poured out on the cross and his resurrection power is enough to give you strength for every day. To say, God, if you're calling me to it, I don't want to limit that. I don't want to set the terms. God, I'm going to let you set the terms. If you're calling me to do something, God, I believe that you can show up and do your work for your glory. Will you pray with me? God, we just ask that you would not let us fall for the lie, the I'm not good enough lie. To think that our weakness could somehow limit your strength and your power. God, you actually say in your word that your power is made perfect in weakness. Because through our weakness, your power is seen all the more. Lord, forgive us for setting limits on what you could do or what you cannot do. Lord, forgive us for being timid to step into the things that you've called us to step into. And also, God, forgive us for thinking we're better than. For having the attitude of I have nothing to learn. Or this person or that person, they don't have anything to teach me. Lord, keep us from being blind to what you want to do, for what you want to teach us in our lives. And God, just like you gave Peter a second chance, God, we pray that even though we've fallen short, even though we've failed, God, you are the God of second chances. So we pray that you would forgive us, free us from the burden, the weight of our sin, the guilt of our sin, to step into the freedom that you give and believe in your power to work in us and through us. And God, work through your church for your glory.